there's just a long history of magnetic therapy. You'd go back 4,000 BC, the Hindus were using magnetized stones known as lodestones, and 2,000 years later, the Chinese were using magnets and magnetized stones basically to heal people from chronic pain and injury. And then the Egyptians were onto it years later. Ancient Greece, Hippocrates used these magnetized stones to alleviate headaches. 1600s, Sir William Gilbert used lodestones to relieve the arthritic pains of Queen Elizabeth I. And then even further to that, there's even more of a history as the FDA went on to approve certain amount of PEMF therapies for things like healing bones and alleviating.
That's what's really well known for.
Right. So 1932, Yale University, they acknowledged PEMF to able to donate energy to depleted body cells, helping to repair and regenerate. 1979, FDA approved the PEMF to combat bone loss. And then 2008, FDA approves the use of PEMF therapy for the treatment in Parkinson's disease for the ability of this magnetic field to heal and rebuild nerve tissue.
We have been given the scientific knowledge, the technical ability, and the materials to pursue the exploration of the universe. To ignore these great resources would be a corruption of a God-given ability.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stefan, and today I'm joined with Dr. Bill McGraw, who is an expert on pulse electromagnetic field therapy. He started off with using pulse electromagnetic field therapy for himself, and now he has a lot of different clients and has worked with this therapy a lot. So today we're going to talk about PEMF, which is the abbreviation, and go through maybe some of the history, next frontiers, and everything in between. So welcome to the channel, Bill, and very glad to have you here, and maybe just get the ball rolling with introduction and where you want to go from there.
Okay, great. Thanks so very much for having me. If we talk about how and why people get into these different fields of alternative medicine, normally people have a real passion for things. They always have a story. There's always a backstory of when and where they were kind of chosen, or they committed to, or they gained a valuable interest in different things in their lives. And so for me, we go back 20 years, and I have a PhD in aquaculture, and I'm working on this huge project in South Africa, typically working type A hours, 16, 18 hours a day. And I started experiencing this debilitating insomnia in the form of sleeping 3 or 4 hours, then I'd wake up and couldn't go back to sleep. So naturally, I go to the old standard MD, and he gives me a prescription drug. I mean, what else would they do, right? And it worked sort of for a while, and then after a while, it stopped working, and I was stuck in this cycle of, the drug's going to work for a month, and then I went back for another drug, and then it developed into insomnia, where I by this time I moved to Panama, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd wake up with this anxiety. It was like my blood pressure would be 210 over 120, and I feel like I'm dying. Wow. And so it was all really destructive for my career. And I just kept going to doctors, and they kept giving me more drugs. And then I went to naturopaths, and they hooked me up to machines and gave me foot baths, and nothing was working. I kept telling them, look, none of this stuff is working. Do you have anything else? And eventually the MD that I was going to see, every month or whatever, finally looked at me and said, look, I don't have any other drugs or anything else to give you. Don't come back here. And so at this point, I'm walking outside the office thinking, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going with this? Why is this happening? And I just said, I'm done with this whole cycle, this madness, because by then it had been years. It had been at least a couple of years. And so I just began reading books and studying to become a naturopathic doctor. And I got into every kind of alternative medicine topic you can imagine. And I determined that I had mineral deficiency of magnesium, potassium, and the anxiety was a physiological response to deficiencies in these minerals. And, then I got into the work of Dr. Joel Wallach, studied everything he had to teach me. And, his idea was that chronic disease was caused by a mineral deficiency. So the next question I had was what causes the mineral deficiency? And that, of course, is heavy metals taking the place of good metals like magnesium and manganese, etc. And so once I detoxed from the heavy metals, most of my problems were over. And when I got done with that, I was still heavy into studying alternative medicine. And the next question I have was, if I went to all these different health professionals, why is it that not a single one could help me over the many years? And it just blew my mind. So I wrote a book on mercury toxicity, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for a whole year until I was finished with that and published it. And then wrote another book on aluminum detox. And now I'm working on another book on copper and so on. And I just became a regular thing from part-time fixing myself and my family to full-time medicine. And that's all I do now. And I got into Rife technology maybe about 2017. I was really into it. And, just working Rife technology every single day on people, and just was so taken by it and what I could do to help people. And from there, I eventually got into PEMF. And the reason for it is that Rife technology is absolutely fantastic at killing stuff in the human body that doesn't belong there, such as bad bacteria, viruses, parasites, cancer cells. It's all easy if you can follow a protocol that's proven itself. And that's the one I developed over years and years of working. And I give that to people in my seminars or in consultations. And the one thing that Rife had a hard time doing, and I expressed this to John White, who's the main guy at Spooky 2 with developing software and so on. And he said, well, I'm working on something. I'm working on this thing. It's going to be out in another year. So lo and behold, the PEMF mat comes out, and I start using it on myself and other people. And it really does an amazing job in reducing pain and helping people sleep, and also good for detox by opening and closing cell membranes, allowing the cell to be energized so that it can receive nutrition and oxygen and then get rid of carbon dioxide. So it's really a detox protocol as well. So when I began using that and then helping people not only detox, but helping them with their pain and insomnia, after all, 80,000 people a year die in the United States from overload of pain relievers. And, some of that's recreation and all that, but people have really a lot of pain. People have a lot of pain and they're overdoing it. If you look at all these deaths that are mysterious, like even Tom Petty, I was a big fan of, he died of prescription drug. And then you go back and you look at all these other people that died mysteriously. Most of the time it's involved with prescription drugs. So it's just no real avenue to be hooked on prescription drugs. They're just horrible in terms of killing people and causing all kinds of addiction. So, I was just looking for this way of relieving people's pain and helping them sleep. And the PMF mat was really, the avenue that I was looking for. And so it really does work in so many different ways.
Yeah, what's interesting about the pulse electromagnetic field therapy and like prescription drugs and everything is a lot of it's just like, what receptor are you binding to, activating, what ion channel are you modulating? And the pulse electromagnetic field therapy does that. That's one of the primary ways that we've identified that it works, is by altering those ion channels. So I found it interesting how you said that a lot of your issues were due to mineral deficiencies and the heavy metals. And then when you fix that, that gave you this like renewal of life force, vitality, energy, and healed a lot of your problems. And that you also discover the PEMF, and that's also touching those electrolyte balances as well. Right. And that's really powerful because a lot of people know to supplement. Of course, there's a lot of like bogus supplements out there, so you have to be careful with which ones you get. What version of magnesium is most effective? People take like magnesium citrate, and then they have terrible GI problems because it's a laxative. Sure. Right. And so it makes things worse in many ways. Now they're not absorbing the minerals and vitamins. But if you don't know, you just think magnesium. But the PEMF I like in many ways, the promise of it, and there's clearly like a lot of people that benefited from it. And I've been using it in an interesting way. We'll talk about it a little bit. I like it because it alters the modulation of these channels themselves, some of these receptors themselves, some of the enzymatic activity itself, which is a little bit different than supplementing with a thing. Because a lot of people have a good diet. Some of these people have like really good diets and they're still having problems. And it's a more fundamental problem than that. And
Mhm.
Were you talking? I think there's multiple mats at Spooky 2 and John White. He's an engineer that makes these things, right?
Yeah, he sure does.
Yeah. This is the one that I've been given, the MiraMate, and this is just a Schumann frequency. So I talk about the Schumann resonances a lot at 7.83 hertz is the average. But
Right.
there's other mats, right? There's a whole line of mats at different frequencies. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. So there's that mat that you just picked up, which is for chronic disease conditions, more chronic pain, and more acute form. They use a frequency of 9.6 hertz and a different amount of amplitude, so it's more of intensity, and it's a smaller machine that actually is portable, and there's two rings that you put around the pain, and you can run it for about 15 minutes, and that helps to get rid of acute pain. So there's a large mat and then a smaller, mini device that you can carry it with you. And in fact, it's around here somewhere.
Okay.
I have so many devices around here that I'm working on with people, but
Yeah.
you can look that up. It's got two small rings. You put it around the area of pain, and it runs a 9.6 hertz, and it's more intense, and you can get rid of your pain in about 15 minutes.
This is it's pretty big. They have a new one they just came out with, but this is at 25 and also 80 Gauss. I think those are the numbers. And which is pretty strong.
There's just an intensity dial that you can reduce the intensity of the device.
Yeah. I'm curious what the Gauss reading is, if you know the Gauss value, like the range.
Yes,
probably similar to this,
actually. Let me bring that up here, and I can actually tell you what that is. So the mat is actually 6,000 Gauss, 7.8 hertz, as I mentioned, 2 power levels. It's 5-volt adapter.
No, it's just 6,000 Gauss. It's up there. It's way up there.
Oh yeah. And the other one is actually 200, but it's a smaller, concentrates as a smaller area. That 6,000 is spread out over the entire mat, which is, you just basically stick it underneath your mattress pad, and then you leave it there and turn it on at night and so on. It's fairly comfortable. And the other one is 9.6 hertz, 200. And I actually have I have one of these things here. There's so many, as I mentioned, so many devices, but basically what you do is you have a strap, just a simple, belt type thing, and you just strap it around wherever you have your pain, whether it's on your wrist or around the center of your body for your back pain or whatever. And you're putting one ring on one side and one on the other. And what it does is ameliorates the acute pain in your body. And that really works, not just for me and what I've done, but there's a lot of people that are telling me that it's really effective. So those are the two devices. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I want to mention to everyone that's watching this is to back up just a little bit and to give a little bit of context. Like the Earth's magnetic field, the one that we evolved in, there's multiple fields, electromagnetic fields that exist. The Earth's magnetic field has a strength of about 25 to 65 Gauss, so 25,000 to 65,000 nanotesla. So these fields are stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. And they're localized. So the Earth's field is always there. It doesn't matter where you go, it's always going to be there. And there's cellular interactions with that static field. And the reason these pulse electromagnetic field therapy techniques can have beneficial effects on the body, and you also have to be very mindful and careful with these. Luckily, there's a lot of good information out there on how to use them. They're able to affect change in some part because they have these fields that are stronger than the Earth's. So maybe could you share with us like the difference between a static and a pulse field and why? Because there's a lot of good research on static fields and how that can be really useful. Like yesterday, I just did some biomagnetic therapy where they use like 1,000 Gauss magnets and put them on the body. That was really cool. Really, like I'll be releasing an interview. Maybe it's already out. Some content on that, education on that. But that's a static field, and the pulse fields are different, DC, AC. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Please.
There's just a long history of magnetic therapy. You'd go back 4,000 BC, the Hindus were using magnetized stones known as lodestones, and the 2,000 years later, the Chinese were using magnets and magnetized stones basically to heal people from chronic pain and injury, and then the Egyptians were onto it. years later, ancient Greece, Hippocrates used these magnetized stones to alleviate headaches. 1600s, Sir William Gilbert used lodestones to relieve the arthritic pains of Queen Elizabeth the First. And then even further to that, there's even more of a history as the FDA went on to approve certain amount of PMF therapies for things like healing bones and alleviating
That's what's really well known for.
Right. So 1932, Yale University, they acknowledged PMF to able to donate energy to depleted body cells, helping to repair and regenerate. 1979, FDA approved the PEMF to combat bone loss. And then 2008, FDA approves the use of PEMF therapy for the treatment in Parkinson's disease for the ability of this magnetic field to heal and rebuild nerve tissue, which is huge. Now, as 2 out of 3 people over the age of 80 is going to die from Alzheimer's in the next 20 years. So
neurodegenerative problems are serious, and it seems to be an increasing problem with the increasing electrosmog of our environment.
Oh yeah.
And that's the interesting thing, and that's one of the reservations people might have. Is like, oh well, there's so much electromagnetic field energy now as compared to before. Why would adding more help? But I think it's really the precision application of these fields, certain parts, certain time windows, and the fact that it's this pulse feed at a specific frequency. So that's really important to be educated on, to understand, so you can use these therapies to their maximum benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, putting electrical charge through a copper wire creates a toroidal field, and we put a pulse toroidal field. And so this has more of an exemplary effect in terms of being able to heal the body, being able to charge cells, create a cell membrane potential, plus outside minus inside, which allows the flow of not only energy, but oxygen, nutrients, minerals, carbon dioxide, water, toxins out of the cell, and so on. So one of the ideas of chronic disease and aging is, as we age, there's a loss of functionality of cells, and cell turnover decreases. So cells are older and they don't function as well. So there's an idea that the PEMF technology is actually good as an anti-aging protocol, and the fact that you're charging cells to work more functional. They're more functional, they work better, and there's a better turnover of cell division, and more new cells are produced over time. And also, all these other things like increase in endorphins, we heal faster, we sleep better when we can put a PMF field next to the body in some form or another, whether it be a mat or whether it be some of these rings that you put directly on pain. And so the field extends for typically 6 inches. And it's just a great alternative to having to deal with, pain and all these detox issues that people are into. And I think I did a seminar in insomnia, and it's one of the biggest problems people have today. And like you say, for everything from 5G to Wi-Fi to everybody has a cell phone, and nobody leaves it outside the bedroom. But most people have it.
But I'm one of the few. Yeah,
that's right. So most people just have it on the desk and reach for the cell phone in the middle of the night to check the time, check your alarm, check your emails, and so on. And I'm guilty of that, because a lot of times I'll put it somewhere and forget, and I'll say, I think I have this and this to do, and I can't remember. But all those fields back in the day used to be just radio and TV. Now you've got all these different energies in the atmosphere, the Wi-Fi and all this stuff. And I think it's really screwing people up. And the more heavy metals you have, the more an effect these different fields have on the body. Right. So it's complicated, and I think it's going to become more and more important as we go on in terms of increasing technologies. And you can have the Internet of Things and smart meters. And I found that the more heavy metals, the more problems people are having. And right now, heavy metals in the environment and in the water and our food are higher than ever. So it's just something that we're just not going to be able to get away from, and we're going to have to constantly deal with that.
Yeah, my friend went with me to this biomagnetism therapy, and they use muscle testing to identify things. So that's a conversation in and of itself. Without
Sure.
going to that, identified. We also did a heavy metal detox screen, like to see what pairs that need to be placed. And she was given arsenic, and she used to live in Texas and just recently moved and is dealing with chronic fatigue.
Yep.
And she was like, yeah, we knew there was arsenic in the water. Just that we had no way, we had like no money for the reverse osmosis filter because those things are like bloody expensive.
Right.
And you need the remineralizer. Then it's also like, is that remineralizer good? Like, do they have the right ratios? There's like such a lack of depth of understanding on this. Whereas before, you could, hopefully just go out to the spring and nature would give you that right ratio of everything you need. And if you grew up there, then your body, found its homeostasis. And a lot of this is just, we're being shifted away from homeostasis. The body's trying to bring it back to center. And then as a result, it's creating these health symptoms, which may actually in and of itself be what you need to do. Like with chronic fatigue, it's probably like you need to do nothing to like be able to handle that stress load. Ideally, you have energy, but if you don't have the capability, if you were to run a marathon on top of this huge stress load, that might be the final overload. So it's saying, no, you have to do nothing. But then it's really tough because now you're doing nothing from, let's say, chronic fatigue. You're really just resting, but you're resting inside your house, which has the 60 hertz power grid in North America. And then, maybe you have a Wi-Fi router, 2 extenders. You're in an apartment building, so there's like, 40 Wi-Fi routers near you. And then, your phone. That's, people don't realize that. I think it's important to make people aware that receiving the electromagnetic radiation to a device, it doesn't have to be like the strongest power, but for the cell phone or the laptop, like the cell phone in particular, to reach the tower, has to put out a very strong field. And of course, that then, via the inverse square law, drops, pretty rapidly, but it needs to still be able to, catch that waveform and find the information signal on top and then relay that through the full system. So it's going to be a very powerful signal at your phone. And then it'll be less powerful, but still powerful enough to get picked up maybe 2 kilometers away at the tower. And the issue with something like 5G and eventually there'll be 6G, 7G is that to increase the information density, they're making the waveform shorter. The wavelength is reducing. So now it's getting closer and closer to the ionization potential. And we know that electromagnetic fields have non-thermal, non-ionization bioelectric health effects via like, those voltage gated channel interactions and even like DNA and enzyme reactions and cell membrane, like you talked about a little bit. So it's this tricky situation. Have you heard of earthing? Have you tried earthing? Do you practice earthing?
Yeah, I do. Back in the day when I first started treating clients here in Panama, they would always say, well, I feel so much better when I go down to the beach and, we're able to walk in the sand and the water. And of course, that's earthing, receiving electrons from the earth. And it was beneficial for relaxation, but also reduce stress and pain. So, I understood that. And then, I got into reading books, and then we have earthing mats where we connect to the ground all the time. But here in Panama, it's funny because we have so many parasites that you could pick up from the ground, hookworm and so on. So it's kind of more dangerous to actually walk around on the bare ground in your bare feet, because you will pick up a parasite. We don't have much in terms of domestic water treatment and wastewater treatment. We really haven't gotten into it really in this province because we're out near the Costa Rican border. We're just not anywhere near Panama City. So, the infrastructure here is just not quite up to specs. A lot of the indigenous people who live in the mountains don't have wastewater treatment. So it's kind of dicey where you get your water from and how you pick up parasites. And so, this is whole idea of, well, be careful. Don't walk outside in bare feet because you'll pick up parasites from the ground. And because we live in the subtropics where it's always warm and so on, they're constantly there. So it's something to be aware of. So I always tell people, go down to the beach and do that, or at least walk in the streams and so on, so you don't pick up too many parasites. But in the soils, they're pretty active in terms of transfer of parasites. So I guess there's that to think about. One other thing that you mentioned, which is really interesting, is the ions and the ratio. the ions in our blood are nearly the exact same proportion of what's in the ocean. So ocean salt water has about the same ratio of magnesium, potassium, calcium that what we have in our blood. So I make a salt mix which has got ratio of 4 magnesium to 1 calcium to 2 potassium, which is the potassium slightly higher, which tends to have a relaxing, calming effect on the human body that's overloaded from stress and in chronic fight or flight reaction. So salt mixes like that, extra magnesium in the human body, it's in the form of magnesium chloride, of course. And so when you put in those ions in about that proportion, it's good for people who are constantly sweating, like what we do here is constantly sweat outside. And then it's also good for people who have stress overload, is to get ions in the same proportion of what's normally in the blood. And it helps to balance ions and helps them sleep and helps them reduce stress and fatigue over time.
Yeah, electrolytes. And those are a critical component if you want the PEMF therapy to really be effective. I mean, certainly it'll have some effect just through the mechanisms of electromagnetism and how it interacts with the body, but there's ways to optimize these effects. And sometimes those optimizations can really make a big difference. And I think that's also an important component of this education process and giving people kind of the, if you want the full depth, you kind of have to figure it all out yourself at this stage, at least. But to give people really good starting points, like, okay, you can do the PEMF therapy, you can buy this device, or if you don't have the money, you can do earthing, go to the ocean, swim. That's different than PEMF, but related. But then also be mindful of your electrolyte intake and your mineral balance and your overall, your overall diet and lifestyle. And like you were talking about having the phone near the bed table, the dresser drawer or something, and picking it up and checking something at 2 a.m. And the thing with that, it's not just the fact that it has this magnetic field, it's also that, now there's a lot of blue light beaming out, and now you're creating this neural pathway to kind of expect to get a blue light shot, like a shot of blue light, energizing brainwave activity at 2 a.m. So when you start to go and develop these over time, it's kind of sinister in some ways that now you find yourself waking up at 2 a.m. because you've done that in the past. And some of these things require a really big pattern break. And like one way for someone to do that would literally be like, I'm just going to go camping for 2 weeks, and then it all gets reset because that groove is no longer water is no longer running through it. Electrical activity is not stimulating it. The circadian rhythm is not established for 2 weeks to pick up the phone at 2. But the PEMF is nice because it can help to rewire some of those connections because it is an agent of change. And my experience with the mat here is, I'm in pretty good health. So I don't really have any chronic health issues and stuff. I have my things that I'm very mindful and working on. But I really liked it because it's at that Schumann frequency. And to get like a Schumann resonance generator, there's a lot of research that was done in like the early 60s and the 70s and 80s. And a lot of German manufacturers made these little like Schumann generators that you can't find anymore. At least I haven't been able to find them. They're pretty like rare, and they were like a little pocket harmonizer, so they called them. But I like this a lot, even if I don't necessarily lay it under my bed, or I like using it while I stretch a little bit to help open up the ion channels and let the fascia kind of remodel. But I like it just as a Schumann generator in the house. Has the 2 power settings. You can turn it on and you can turn it off. You can go from 25 to 80. I believe those are the numbers in Gauss. And just as a cost-effective Schumann generator that will get the whole house blanketed, that's really cool. And then you can also use it for these other things. So I like how there's multiple ways to use PEMF. You can use the little ring ones that you have like directly on the body, but this can even just be simply put in the corner of your house somewhere and flipped on, and then see how that makes you feel. Because I know a lot of people will use like binaural beats to entrain Schumann waves, but the science of binaural beats is there, but it's not so effective. I think it's overhyped in its effectiveness because it's easy. You can click a YouTube video or whatever and start to get binaural beats. But this is
Right.
actually what you're trying to do. You're actually trying to stimulate that Schumann field. And,
Right.
and that's really cool that you could use that in other ways like that. And that's how I've been primarily using it. And that's been really nice. I've noticed like kind of an enhancement in creativity and focus and some of these more like theta rhythm type effects from using it just as a generator like that.
Well, yeah, interesting stuff. What do you think about negative ion generators? I've been getting more into them as a way of cleaning the air, charging, relaxing. Do you have any experience with that?
No, but I started to research into them because our ducts in this house are like loaded with mold and they need to get totally wiped.
Yeah.
And negative ion generator, is putting out these negative ions to have this negative charge, and it'll react then with, let's say like a mold spore or bacteria. You can use it for that reason. But because they're ions, they have a very high charge, so they can break that molecular bond and then kill that spore. But the issue with that for us is that issue and benefit, right? Two edges of the sword, is that it can also do that potentially with healthy cells. So if you're like antioxidant deficient, then it's potentially going to be pretty tough on you, because you're just like, reacting with all the cells. You're reacting with some of the cancer cells. We all have cancer cells to some degree that just the immune system gobbles up. Some people it goes, obviously it goes bad. And then there's the old cells that you're talking about that should have undergone apoptosis a while ago. But I have some reservations with the ion generators, because now you're breathing in effectively ozone all the time, and ozone can be toxic. You don't want too much. It's like it can be therapeutic, but then it can also be toxic. I feel like it's therapeutic in an acute sense. Like sometimes, like you go to the mountains and there's like a generation of ozone due to a thunderstorm, and it helps to, preferentially will bind to those older cells or dead cells or dying cells, whatever, because the body funnels it there through antioxidants. But then if you're constantly getting it in, then that could, like, in the long run, be very bad for you. Like ozone is a toxic, O3 in particular. So I think there has to be some nuance in that application. But I think that could be very powerful, because it is one of those methods that can go down at the molecular level, at that cellular level, and enact change. And if all the other factors are in place too, like if you had the healthy diet, the right electrolyte balance, all this stuff, then it should allow for a fairly fast remodeling of the body, especially if you're like fasting, you're in that protective state of autophagy, and all the healthy cells are gonna be like, nope, you're not going to react with us. Then those ions will eventually react with pathogens, like let's say like yeast or candida viruses, the cells that need to go be recycled. So I think it can be very powerful for that. But I haven't used it personally. I just understand the science of like ions and charged particles fairly well, and I can kind of bridge my two schools of understanding with biology and some of these electromagnetic dynamics together. But in terms of direct experience with a negative charge ion generator, I don't have one yet, though. I think we all have naturally just through our environment at times. But you have one yourself? You use one?
Yeah, I do. I've got a newer model, which is supposedly produces very low amounts of ozone as it's producing the ions. So I have a number of clients that suffer from tinnitus, and one of the things that I've had really positive experience with is just cleaning the air up, because sometimes I think they have inner ear infections. And so by taking some of the trash out of the atmosphere, maybe reducing mold spores, like you mentioned, their tinnitus sometimes clears up when they can get rid of some of these inner ear infections. So that's one of the things I was thinking of. They get into these super air filters, the HEPA and all that, and it's helped people clear up their tinnitus and some of these chronic ear infections that they have. So I was heading down that road eventually, looking at different ways of cleaning up the environment. We don't have much in the way here of knowledge of clean air and whatever. We don't have a lot of industry, on the other hand, as well. But, just the infrastructure is just not what it is in the United States. So it's something to be continually mindful, is how can we bridge the gap between, lack of engineering and development of infrastructure at different levels. So, for instance, wastewater treatment, so on, where they're just getting into that now and finding different technologies that people can use on their own rather than relying on maybe the local government to catch up with certain ways and doing certain things to help people out in that avenue. So
yeah, I think it's really the future in many ways. Is you would like to rely on some central authority that is grounded and has the right info, or at least is doing a pretty good job. But I think we're in an era of like personal self-responsibility. I mean, we always have been, but especially now, if you really want to be healthy, really want to live a fruitful life, and you're going to have to shape your environment yourself to whatever specs you want. But I'm glad you mentioned the tinnitus, because I have a lot of people that comment on my channel talking about tinnitus, specifically around like space weather events and geomagnetic storms and increases in the Schumann resonances in terms of their power. And I haven't really had an answer for them too much yet, but the inner ear infection, that makes sense in regards to that being the factor of tinnitus. And that could kind of be like one of these hidden things that you don't really know you have, because it's, it could be pretty deep in there, but your only symptom is just this ringing. Do you find the PEMF helps with tinnitus?
I haven't gotten into that yet. I do have a PMF mat here, and I do use it in myself, and I have a couple other clients that use it. But I think there's this gap between when a new product or a new technology comes out, like the Spooky 2. All my clients, I do Rife Technology and Spooky 2 on them. When that thing comes out and when actually it enters the setting where people are using it more regular, a lot of people are using it. In other words, there's a gap between when the thing comes out and when a lot of people are going to use it enough so that the word gets around, it reaches a certain saturation, and people will say, oh yeah, I use this, or oh yeah, I use that. And then it really becomes more of a regular thing rather than, hey, that's a new product. Has anybody tried that? So I don't know that I have tried the PMF on that in terms of improving tinnitus, but years ago, it was always cleaning the air was the first thing I try to do, because we live in such I live in such a wet, damp environment all the time. It just rains every single day here for like 8 months, almost every day, and so people have to constantly deal with mold in the house. And so it's something to continually deal with. What I wanted to ask you, you're really the ideal person to ask this because you're so heavy into it, is, people talk a lot about 5G and, whether or not we have it, we don't have it. Is there more transmitters outside the house and it's a smaller wavelength and there's more energy to push that smaller, shorter wavelength? The question I always get is, well, how can we block it off? And if you can only get a cell phone that has 5G and nothing else, you're going to have to use it if you're going to communicate with the rest of the world. And, the question I have is, well, if it's so bad, is there any way we can block it out? And I've heard things like, well, sheets of Mylar and maybe, sleeping in a Faraday cage, and it all gets kind of tinfoil hat out there. I mean, somebody comes into your house and says, what is that? It looks kind of suspicious with a cage and straps around your bed. So, right. Well, no, hang on a minute. That's just a Faraday cage. Oh yeah, sure, buddy. But, without going overboard, is there any real way to deal with, the effects of 5G? We're always hear these stories about, well, it was militarized back in the day, and 5G technology is, if we're going to use it in our cell phones, it used to be used in weapons and all this. And so I was wondering what your idea was on that.
Yeah, there's a few different, I think first, developing a little bit of understanding of like how those fields work is important. Then also there's a few different levels of what you can do. So the first thing that is important to understand is that 5G and 4G and all these others, they're all in this like gigahertz band. 4G and some of these other are high megahertz, and then 5G is just starting to hit into the gigahertz band. So they're cycling billions of times per second. So it's that millimeter wave. So it's a short wavelength, and that influences what it resonates with too. So there is a lot that we don't know about how it directly resonates with cells, cell groups, let's say maybe organs, things of this nature. Whereas radio waves are like really resonating with your entire body to some degree, but then they also can drill down, even interacting with like DNA because it's fractal nature and stuff. So that's another thing too, is the fact that DNA has been shown to since it has self-similar design across all of its scales, that it can connect to and resonate with electromagnetic waves all the way from the ELF range, like near 0 hertz, all the way up to 5G and then beyond to ionizing radiation, which would be like ultraviolet and such. So the 5G in the environment will be changing the movement of electrons through just to use one thing, it can influence the movement of electrons through DNA, changing where they gather, group up, where that potential is stored in DNA, therefore changing its shape and morphology, and therefore changing what parts get activated epigenetically. mRNA goes to the sections that have the charge buildup. That's what it seems to be. That's the best research out there that I found. And then from there, you transcribe the proteins and all this stuff. So it'll all these electromagnetic fields interact with your DNA as far as we've seen and can change your epigenetic expression. The thing with 5G is it's not really necessarily a new problem. 4G was a shorter wavelength, but it's not like a huge difference. It's just, it's a difference, but it's not like the first time we flipped it on, right? The first time we flipped on the cellular networks, that in and of itself was kind of the first introduction of this. This is just like a kind of a small evolution. And as it comes out of the towers, there's more towers because the wave attenuates faster because it's pulsing more often, has more opportunities to react, like to interact these photons with some particle or something, let's say an electron. So it's going to have a higher reactivity. You could call it reactivity because of its faster frequency and shorter wavelength. And so like a radio wave doesn't interact that often because of that. So that's why they need more transmitters, because the air is absorbing a lot of them, but also they'll be absorbed into the walls of the building and then things of that nature. Then the biosphere, us, like we absorb them. And the common thing will be like, oh, well, it's just absorbed and turned into thermal radiation. But as there's plenty of research to show, these electromagnetic fields from the radio spectrum to the microwave spectrum, they have non-thermal bioelectric effects by interacting with like enzymes, like the charge carriers within enzymes, DNA, as we just talked about, the ion channels, etc. So that is going to change electromagnetic potentials in the body at a variety of scales, going all the way down to like the atomic and then up. But I think the bigger problem with 5G, to get more into the meat of what you're talking about, is now that we understand attenuation, is the fact that your phone, again, is going to be the biggest 5G emitter if you have a 5G phone. Like I still have an iPhone 10 because it doesn't have 5G and it works for me. But a lot of phones, you can turn it off. I think at least on the iPhone, you can turn off 5G. Maybe they've removed that now. So the first step is I would turn it off, because you definitely 4G would be safer than 5G, it seems, based on attenuation physics. So you turn that off. And then I always put my phone on airplane mode if it's on my body. It's all about like exposure. So sometimes it'll be on, but very rarely. And I don't put it near anything that's sensitive. You never want to put your phone here. And if you're a guy, don't put your phone near, your good stuff, because that's not going to be good. And you don't want to use your phone. I don't have my phone with me right now, but let's say this is my phone, right? You don't want to like ever talk on the phone like this for extended periods of time. If it's like 1 minute, okay, like it's not the end of the world. Stressing about that's a bigger factor. But when you're on the phone for 2 hours and you're like shooting the shit with someone or whatever, well, and you do it all the time, and some people do, they're on the phone all the time. That's terrible. So the wired headsets are the best because they aren't like using Bluetooth. I think the wireless ones are fine for just like a little bit, like not that often. But ideally, you can just hold it with speaker like this. Yeah. And you can even put it down in front of you, right? And then kind of distance yourself and then speak that way. But the airplane mode is really powerful. And in regards to like the home environment, the nice thing about these waves is, since they have a higher frequency, they will interact and absorb into things like copper fabric, whereas the power grid noise won't really absorb into that because the frequency is low enough that it can pass through these metallic sheets. Even then, you would need a longer, thicker, more energy dense like lead to really shield some of those waves. It helps, but But the copper fabric for sure will block a cell phone wave. 5G doesn't matter. That actually makes it more effective as the frequency goes up. And you can simply put your phone on, not on airplane mode, on, and put in some copper fabric, and you will not be able to call it. It will
Wow.
not react. Nothing of this nature will happen. So, I mean,
Wow.
the microwave is also like, don't go in the kitchen, turn the microwave on for 10 minutes, and then I don't even use a microwave, right? But don't put it on for 10 minutes and stand there the whole time. They put this screen on the front to hopefully block the radiation, but you can use a radiation counter. I have one right here. You can still measure it off the microwave, like the power density of the field. But if you use the microwave, you can get copper fabric and just put it over the front. So just pull it back, open the door, put your thing in, go like this, and then draw it back over. That will block it.
Wow.
In terms of the home environment, if you wanted to really block it, then you could get a copper fabric sheet and then just sew that into like a normal cotton sheet. And that could be like your top sheet that you put over you. And you could even put one
Wow.
underneath you on the bed, and you would never know. That's better than a Faraday cage. Faraday cages that's like for a big electromagnetic pulse, right? Like an EMP device, it'll be able to route that energy because it has a thick metal. But for something like a cell phone signal, if you're really in a bad state with your health, then you should take that step, I think, of using the copper fabric laying at the base of your bed to stop things from coming up. And then also you could have that as your top sheet. Use the cotton, sew it in with the cotton. They don't really make these yet. I'm hoping to, maybe start to make these. I'm like prototyping right now. And then you sew the cotton there because the copper will react with oils on the skin. So it gets kind of gross over time. But if you use the cotton on top, it's still conductive. That's kind of like an earthing setup too. So you can both block this radiation and then also connect it to a ground stake outside and earth. And that's also good for the body in terms of improving antioxidant activity and decharging free radicals and stuff.
How about grounding the roof? I had one client was talking to me about running copper wire from the roof into the ground and grounding. Well, we have metal roofs here, so they're made out of zinc and a zinc composite. So, what do you think about that? Is that just too tinfoil hat, or does that have potential of reducing some of the radiation we're exposed to, or is that just
that's not tinfoil hat at all. That makes perfect sense for a few reasons. Because if you have a lightning strike, right, you would certainly want some route for that to go. And if it's raining all the time there, I'm sure you get some epic thunderstorms. You're one of those lightning chimneys. So what is it? I think it's every day at 800 UTC, you get a lot of lightning activity in the general region. But yeah, that'd be a smart thing to do, to build that electromagnetic conduction. Otherwise, you're creating this like higher potential zone here, and then if you can facilitate that, and it's not broken up by this resistive body of air and wood in between or concrete, you can connect that directly. We have a copper line, ideally one on each side. Then yeah, that would help. Just for a safety perspective, like lightning strikes, but then also, any electromagnetic radiation from the environment, like artificial, will hit that roof and get absorbed into that, and then it'll flow into the earth and decharge pretty nicely. That would be useful, certainly. You do have some ability to absorb these things through your skin, so you're getting some Epsom salts some magnesium into your body through something like that. With apple cider vinegar, it's just on the it's an acid, but now you have the microbiome mother, so that eventually influences their microbiome state. And the thing with pulling these things out and particles and everything is that a lot of times these watercolor changes is due to just chemical reactions happening with the stuff that's in there. So it's like, oh, look at all this stuff I pulled. I was like, is the chemical reaction?
I think you totally opened up the proverbial can of worms there, because looking at the research over time with foot baths, where you're putting a DC current, I think, through the water, and it's supposed to draw out all these toxins. Looking at the research is that the foot bath is the same color with or without the feet, and it's actually rust. It's oxidation of the metals, and and all that. On the other hand, I do see some clients talking about these various colors, these green colors and all that. And I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but the research in as far as the scientific journals state that it activates a detox system or detox mechanisms within the body. In other words, you'll dump more toxins through the urine and it will relieve some pain. So maybe that's what you're talking about, is more along the lines of maybe having an earthing effect or a biomagnetic effect on the human body, because people are always talking, well, when I do that, I have less pain. Okay, maybe there's that. But the research always said that there wasn't much in terms of toxins being removed through the feet. But I have certain clients that swear, oh, I got all these different colors. Come on, what else? It's not all rust. So I kind of still up in the air as to what to make of the whole foot bath thing and removing toxins through the feet. And the new idea, of course, is removing these nanoparticles. One other thought here is that with the Spooky 2 Central, there's an output on that amplifier from when you're making the plasma device for the transfer of right frequencies. That's just there's a pulsed electromagnetic field device. There's bunches of them around here that you place on the body, which transmit 100 hertz to open and close cell membranes to allow the transfer of the rife frequency through the body faster and more efficiently. So that's primarily how I got into the PEMF. And then, of course, smaller applications. Let's say you've got that small PEMF coil you're putting directly on, let's say, a wound or a fractured bone, and there would be remarkably increase in healing. So decrease in healing time is one of the things I've seen with PEMF devices. Do you have any experience with that as far as the healing effects and of PEMF and all that?
Not for me personally. I'm much more on the earthing side, and I haven't necessarily needed to deal with this. But to kind of address all the things that you brought up, there's a little bit of this concept of like finding some easy path out of something. And there's karma that builds up, and some of it's like, self-imposed. Other times it's like, environmental karma. You're in Texas, you're drinking the water, there's arsenic. You ideally can move, but perhaps, I'm not going to get into, judging everybody for their limitations in life. So there's things, karma like that you then might have to deal with. And then there's karma like you ate a lot of cheesecake every single night and you built up some vast stores of body fat. And during this, then you had more room for these toxins to be shuttled in there, for example, because the body, it's like, I can process this now, but it might be overload on your detox systems and too stressful. So we will put it into things like body fat. And then as a result, when there's a more beneficial time, we can start to detox. But as they build, if it continues to build, then it has these long-term slow detoxing effects. So people are in many ways looking to obviously, yes, we want to remediate these problems, but you try to make it as easy as possible, but there's still going to be some effect that you're going to have to deal with this reaction of now releasing these things. So you just want to put the body in the most protective state possible. In regards to the foot baths, I mean, my thought is like, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So there's something there. There's some truth to that. I think the earthing effect certainly. I think maybe there's a few different things to help explain this, and you are doing some ionic balancing by using either an acid or the Epsom salts, whatever. I don't like the idea necessarily of running a DC like current in there. I think it'd be better to just do this outside with the Earth's natural DC current. Because I think a lot of these fields we're getting already are too much, and the PEMF should really be very like, the application should be very specific, or you should have it like, you have like a serious problem and therefore its application is like for like, big time thing. And not to like just go crazy. Like, you don't want to buy, I wouldn't want someone to buy like 5 devices and run them simultaneously, right? Then it's like, very, very precise applications. I think that'll have the biggest effect. So that's with some of these like protocols and things. I think it behooves to learn also about things like fasting. So, okay, you're going to do some heavy metal detox, or this like nanoparticle detox, or you have things that your body's producing that's not supposed to, and you want to be able to detox that. And actually, let's say, why is your body producing those? You uptook some DNA into your cells that was patented, right? That's the problem now. It's literally the problem now is that you took up patented DNA through CRISPR technology applied. And now some portion of your cells are producing these toxins endogenously. And as they undergo mitosis and produce more cells, then you have to deal with ever increasing loads of this because they were instructed to do that. So if you want to remove these things, you need to attack things from all fronts simultaneously and like, so do this while fasting. And then, find methods that help to pull toxins out of the body. And then while you're doing that, support things that, are involved in that detoxification process. So support the kidneys with certain herbs, support the liver with certain herbs, make sure the bladder is healthy because it's going to be holding on and being exposed to these toxins in many ways, right? Your entire digestive system will be a big detox pathway. The immune system is going to be activated and triggered. So make sure you're not doing anything to trigger the immune system, which is a lot of things out there. Things like just a food, for example, would be dairy, right? I like dairy. I'm not saying don't have it, but it can trigger the immune system. A lot of foods can. Some herbs can. Certain people can, right? Who are you with all the time? The air that you're breathing, is it fresh? And so it's like this multifaceted approach. But it's appealing to just have this foot bath that you can put in, and then it's like within 5 minutes, 10 years of bad decisions is like just flushed out of your body. I don't think that's possible. Right. But I do think that if you combine some of these different modalities and you do them consciously, you can actually make the healing process much easier than the buildup. Like it's not a 1-to-1, 10 years of problems, 10 years of healing. I think it could be 10 years in a 1 year. Yeah. I think that's very possible, but it just, having that right footing, that's primarily at the end of the day through do-it-yourself research, but then also you hope that there's people that have really condensed and collected this information with integrity and put it out there for you, to give you a really good head start, because like not everyone has the brain to read a research paper, and that's not a bad thing, but then not everyone has that or the time to read like hundreds of them and then summarize, condense, and find the truth in between, because a lot of these scientists, they aren't reading across disciplines, so they don't know. They're just in their one very specific narrow field. So that's something I do, is I read across all these fields, and hopefully I'm doing my best to condense, summarize, find that kind of simplified truth, and then here you go, and then also research more. Right. But I hope I addressed your question there. I feel like there might be a little bit more that I'm missing. If you wanted to,
no, I think you brought up another important part of the conversation, is the transfer of information, maybe from a science level into more layman's terms, and how people can apply these things. There's a gap there in between the engineers, even at Spooky 2, and what they're developing and what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, applying this technology to people. And not everything that they offer is going to be a benefit to every person. So it's kind of like, it's going to take people like us to look at that technology that comes out of the engineers and the science and apply it on a daily basis to people where you're using this treatment, or you're using earthing or whatever. What is the effect on that? A practical effect on people, and how is it helping them? And I totally agree with the old idea that people just want to go on a detox weekend, and then they're gonna, shoot everything that they've acquired over 10 years, and there's this idea, well, I'm just gonna detox weekend, and then let's go out, as you would say, for the cheesecake and whatever's. But yeah, there's this idea. I have clients that are totally like that. Rather than changing a lifestyle and understanding just the basics of what's going on and how simple things can affect them, a lot of times people can be their own worst enemy, and they get into these situations where they're just gonna, I'm just gonna do this or the next new thing, without so much understanding the basic science of it and how it's applied to people and the effect on them. In layman's terms, being able to put that and say, look, this is what's happened to you. This is what you need to do. And a lot of times, almost all the time, it has to be a lifestyle change rather than well, I'm fine. I'm just going to do a sweat therapy for a week or whatever, and then I'm out. But you know what? As you get into this, as you know, it becomes more along the lines of months to years, and then, well, it's a change in lifestyle, really,
Yeah,
rather than just saying that, oh no, I'm just going to detox. I'm on a detox weekend, and then that'll clean her up, and then I'm back to doing whatever, you know.
yeah, constant evolution. You're finding new, deeper layers that require, let's say, optimization or healing. I mean, there's the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual body. So you might start with the physical, then all of a sudden be like, whoa, like there's all these emotional things connected. Like I can't touch my toes, and if I stretch for 5 minutes, I like start feeling things I haven't felt before because you're activating the somatic system. And to circle back to something you said earlier with in your practice giving people Rife technology, and then they get sleepy and they kind of go to sleep. When I did the biomagnetic therapy 2 days ago, I with the earthing and with the lifestyle I've built, I've done a really good job of like keeping my nervous system balanced between sympathetic and parasympathetic. I go to the gym, I go to yoga. I can just break out into a sprint if I want, but I'm also like resting and relaxing. I'm not overstressed, and that is a primary thing that I wanted to do at this age. So I didn't have these like stress buildups and then go through that loop. So I'm like in tune with that pretty well. I can't say it can't be improved more, but I'm pretty in tune with that. I did the biomagnetic therapy, and right at the end of her placing the final magnets, I went to sleep. And it was like a very low level of sleep. And then I think it's like 10, 15 minutes later, she woke me up, and then we did there was like an affirmation that I spoke through, which was really good. But the point of me mentioning that is that the body goes into those that parasympathetic activity. The fact that it's being triggered is really good. That's a good sign for anyone that's like cautious about this. Like the fact that it's triggering parasympathetic activity, which where most people are like heavily deficient and out of balance, that's a good sign that it's good for you. And then B, that is that protective state too. I mean, that's where the body, when you're sleeping, does a lot of these big regenerative processes.
Yes. Oh yeah.
And so whether that's, I find that happens often with earthing. So I'm interested. It's interesting to hear that you get that all the time with your clients.
Yes.
And the thing with the PEMF that's important to know is that it increases, in many ways, increases the apoptosis rate, so that programmed cell death. So it's super effective with cancer. It seems to target cancer more strongly due to the resonant characteristics of the cancer cell, that DNA in there, its enzymatic activity. Like cancer contains more DNA, more nuclei. It can be like multinucleated, whereas a normal cell is one nucleus and just the bundle of chromosomes inside.
Yeah.
So that would explain why it has a stronger effect on cancer, but it will still have an effect on cells. And so for the body to go into that parasympathetic healing state, and ideally like you're fasting too, even if it's just an intermittent fast, then that'll further protect those cells. And some of the healing effect comes to the fact that you are killing off some of your cells. They might not be like, cancerous, but they're also maybe not the healthiest. And then as a result of there not being space there, the body can undergo, proliferation and fill in those gaps. And to kind of go, I guess, to give people a little breadcrumb one step further, is one of the interesting things about bioelectricity is some of the strongest fields of the body, these regenerative bioelectric fields, emanate from the bones. And when you take those fields that are measured, and then they've done some studies like with mice and things, and you apply that field and the bone's not there, the regenerative effect is almost nothing, because the bone marrow itself contains these undifferentiated like stem cells. And as you get older, there's less and less of them.
Yep.
So what's really quite disturbing with, for example, like the advent of spike proteins is that they accumulate in bone marrow and they trigger these inflammatory responses. So now you're attacking those de-differentiated cell populations. And another like evidence and clue that PEMF has some really powerful therapeutic effects is that of all the things that it's been researched for, it seems that it helps the most with osteoporosis, bone growth, bone healing, fracture mends, things of that nature. So it seems to be working at that deep level with the osteoblast and the bone marrow and with those de-differentiated cells, and potentially helping those to proliferate, which then not there's like multiple methods of healing. There's the cells can divide and fill in a gap. There is, your body can just shoot some collagen fibers and create a scar over it and fill in kind of the wound. Or your body can literally send these de-differentiated cells, and then your overall morphogenetic field instructs them, okay, this one becomes that bone tissue, and then this one next to it becomes the cartilage tissue. And now you like have de novo, regeneration from the base. And that is the most powerful. That's how a salamander cut off the arm can literally regrow its entire arm.
Right.
Or some of these other creatures, you can cut them in half and they're like, I don't care. They just totally regrow.
Right.
But the more complex the organism, the harder it is to tap. It seems to be harder to tap into those really powerful, deep regenerative mechanisms. And then also as the age increases, it seems. So there's this connection with PEMF and being able to, by altering those populations, immune systems housed in the cells, the bone marrow, to a large degree, like the T cells. And then also seems there's a connection there with therefore longevity, because if you're going to live a long time, you're going to need new cell populations, not a division that where now the telomeres are shorter on those chromosomes, like a brand new cell population in that area.
Right.
So I think it's really exciting how now all these different fields are starting to be seen holistically together. And we have people like the founder of Spooky 2 and his entire team, really putting good engineering behind these products and choosing frequencies that are important. Like the fact that this is a Schumann frequency is the absolute best out there. Like he could have been like, oh, I'll make it a 50 hertz field. It's like there is science showing the 50 and 60 hertz, like in a clinical setting, can do it just because it is some resonant field, but we're already immersed in it. So we don't need the 50 hertz. Like the Schumann field is the one that we evolved in. That's the intelligent application of this. And then the Rife technology goes through and perhaps, a yeast cell vibrates specifically at this one and a pathogen specifically that frequency. So
that's right.
There's those applications, but for just like a general, as I say, if you're interested in this and just want like a general tool, then that Schumann frequency, this mat, it's large, so it covers quite a bit of the body. You could even just use it as a generator in the home, which is what I've been doing for the most part. But it's, you can stretch with it. Even if it is over there and you're stretching with it, then it's still having an effect because it's creating that pulsed field interacting with the Earth's static magnetic field, which is like I'm not sure if you know ion cyclotron resonance and some of the science behind that.
Not really.
It's not many people are. I just started researching into it, but it's really fascinating because these ions have this cyclical resonance and vibration in static fields. And then when you apply that pulse field, that's what triggers them to then start to move and jump out of different sometimes ions can get locked in things called coherency domains based on water, and that's why the water is so important, and your minerals and everything, it's all connected. And I hope that this conversation that we've had have helped to put out some information, kind of paths and breadcrumbs and tendrils, you could say, but also to create like a more cohesive whole summation for people to understand, and so people can kind of fill in the gaps themselves, because we're never going to know everything. But if you're on a healing journey, there's a lot of ways to heal the body beyond just a pharmaceutical pill.
Sure. Absolutely.
Those at the end of the day are just working on electromagnetism themselves, because they're binding certain receptors based on the electromagnetic characteristics. And that's one of the I'm curious as to your thoughts as to the next frontier in some of this electromagnetic therapy. I know one example that I can call out would be how you can measure the specific electromagnetic frequency of, let's say, an herb or supplement.
Sure.
And then the idea is that now that you have that frequency, instead of them having to actually take the herb, is
Right.
that they could just apply that
Right.
and get some of the same effects. I think that is really a powerful concept, that you could develop this pharmaceutical, for example. It doesn't have to be pharmaceutical, but let's say it is. You could develop a pharmaceutical, instead of giving to them, you could just give them the field.
Right.
I think that's a frontier in like biomagnetic therapy, but I'm curious as to some other kind of vistas that you see, that, the sooner you can start to experiment with this safely, then perhaps that is that more powerful method, which cuts down that healing window, because that is important to reduce that.
Yeah, absolutely. Using the remote technology and quantum entanglement, we're able to actually use a fingernail, place it in a device and expose it to frequencies and have it affect all the rest of the DNA that's the same no matter where they are in the universe. So 10 years ago, I had a hard time getting my head around this because it interferes with my traditional science training. But as soon as I accepted it, I was able to open my brain and my ideas to something that was totally non-connective with everything else I had been thinking and learning and processing over the years. And so quantum science was an absolute mind blower. Quantum entanglement, where let's say somebody gets a kidney from someone else and they suddenly start acquiring the characteristics of the person that gave them the organ. So this DNA has memory and energy beyond traditional science means of understanding. And that was mind blowing. But getting back to the herb thing, we have in the Spooky 2 database, we have all the frequencies to all the herbs, as well as molecular weights of compounds, even prescription drugs. We can use those frequencies that emulate the molecular weights, or the effect rather, of the prescription drugs, and then get the effect of that prescription drug without the side effect. That's been my experience. And so there's that. And there's also, we have, the scalar field. We establish scalar field to boxes, and we create a scalar field. We can put a compound or essential oil on the receiver end of the Spooky 2 scalar field, and then what happens is it modulates the frequencies of the scalar field, so that frequency of that particular compound or essential oil is actually moved through the scalar field, and it becomes a therapeutic frequency through the scalar field that you can benefit from. But also we have another transmitter end of the box where you can put a glass of water, which will then be imprinted, which you haven't gotten into fully yet in this long conversation that we've developed here. But you can imprint those frequencies into the water. I think you mentioned water, talking about water before and its special chemistry. You can imprint those frequencies into the water and drink the water throughout the day and receive the frequency via the special properties of water. So that is some frontiers of research that I don't know people really understand, but they're probably already benefiting from all over the world, because the scalar boxes for Spooky 2s all over. People have been using remotes for 15 years at least. Even from South Africa, there was Johan Stegman working with remote technology, and then John White picks it up in 2015 and develops a computer program and enables us to benefit from all these different frequencies and different waveforms and amplitude duty cycles, etc., and being able to manipulate so much more of the frequencies and the type of frequencies for applications in the human body through remote technology, quantum entanglement, through the scalar field, through traditional Rife technology, where we're applying pads to the body, putting a sweep from 41,000 to 1.8 million hertz and looking for that resonance, the glass that shatters at the high C note. And when we find that, we reapply that frequency to kill bad bacteria, viruses, parasites, cancer cells. And that's sort of the easiest thing that we do. The hardest thing is dealing with the pain and inflammation when a person is older and poor health, late fourth stage cancers, over toxified with all kinds of junk. Not just the heavy metals and, dear Jesus, the forever chemicals and the glyphosates, but like what we're talking now, which is stuff you can't necessarily put your hand to because there's so much going on in terms of magnetic fields and wavelengths. We have meters that can do that, but how many people really are using those meters? I don't know. And how many people are really thinking at the depth that we've gone into, looking at how to protect from certain fields, how to apply certain fields that are more healthful, and so on. It's complex, and narrowing that down from where we've gone to how I'm going to apply it to the client sitting in front of me that's in the middle of a scalar field rife treatment. I mean, that's needed. There's a big gap there, and that's super needed. People like us, they use this stuff all the time and apply it. How can we reach the gap between the science and the patient where it's practical for them and easier for them to understand?
Yeah, that's the art and the science and the magic of that.
Yes.
Really, that develops, that intuition and some of these other characteristics are what's needed for that. And that's, I think, where science misses the boat. And that's why my channel is not purely science. I mean, there's a science to it. The word science has so many definitions now that you have to be careful with the language that you use, even because I could say science, one person thinks something, someone else thinks something else when I use the word science. But some of these other aspects that are really important, like, can you feel that person's energy and see, like, the muscle testing for this biomagnetic therapy was interesting because I was like doing it. I was just basically repeating a mantra in my head and just totally relaxed. But she was able to using muscle testing to get yes and no answers. And I don't necessarily understand it. Like, she showed me like how she can, ask a question in my body, and then it gives, like, the muscle, the leg contracts a little bit more to show yes. Like, how that works, I don't really know. But it was, though. I mean, my friend was with me, so I was able to see her do the yes, no, and the leg would literally like get closer or further away, and just kind of sometimes suspending disbelief a little bit. Still having a good skeptical mindset and let's dig into this and research into this. But sometimes you have to suspend disbelief a little bit to get to a point where then you can kind of work backwards and figure it out, I find. But yeah, when you have that person that really has a lot going on, what is that first step? And that's kind of what I've been thinking about just the past few days, especially of like, what is that simplest but most effective? And I really think it might be water, because the quantum coherency domains of water, these nanometer sized structures that spontaneously start to resonate together. So the water molecules through hydrogen bonding form these coherency domains, these spherical domains. They all begin resonating at the same frequency, and then surround them are undifferentiated, non-coherent water molecules vibrating at all their own frequencies. But these coherency domains are able to capture electromagnetic energy, and they're actually able to capture wavelengths that are huge. Like, they've been shown to capture the Schumann resonance wavelength at 7.83 hertz, 7.5, 8, whatever, which is the wavelength the size of the Earth's circumference, so 40,000 kilometers. But here's this nanometer structure that is able to hold on to that Schumann frequency photon, because it's changing. There's other ways to change the wavelength and keep the frequency through velocity, paring down and stuff of this nature. So it's able to capture that photon, it's able to capture that ion, and then they can form, they form these resonating structures. They can then start to resonate together, form super coherency domains. There can be nested coherency domains. This one's vibrating here, this one's vibrating here, this one's vibrating there. And they are able to store a tremendous amount of information. So, like, that's really powerful with 70% water. And my thought is, like, perhaps the easiest thing, the most beneficial thing is if you're just able to get that water to increase. I mean, the mineral balance is very important, but if you're able to somehow get water to increase the amount of coherency domains, then you can now hold more information throughout your field. And that could perhaps give you that sudden enlightenment for, I should be fasting right now. I should be doing this. Because a lot of people, they know, but they don't understand. Like, they know they should be, let's say, fasting, or they know they shouldn't be eating wheat when they are. Because they have an intolerance, and just even for like the glyphosates, for example, they know these things, but they don't do them. So they don't actually know, like, they don't understand. But perhaps if you change the dynamics at that quantum scale with these like coherency domains, now your information ability goes up. You're capturing the information you need better. And now you literally have a different information field just as a result of the water you're drinking. Simple as just going like this, right? And glug, glug, glug. And now you have those instant shifts where, because I've had those before, those instant shifts are like, I can't do this. Like, I need to do that. It's just your vector just immediately changes. And that might be that. I think that's really powerful. So talking about how you're imprinting the water with that scalar field, I think that is a huge area that's going to be very, very beneficial, and just requires a lot more research. But I could see that because it has to come from within. So helping people is great and all this, but being kind of like enzymes to facilitate these reactions for other people is, I think, kind of where things are going, rather than like forcing, or like a lot of the medical system is just lazy and say, here's just the pill. And then I get my payout from the insurance company, right? They like that setup. But that's not working. It's not working. But it might in many ways boil down to water and just the information field that is in your location in space time. And then if you change that at the fundamental level, through maybe drinking more structured water that's like, let's say, right from a glacier. Like, I've had glacial water, it's incredible. Like, it just feel different. Or like water that's in a scalar field, like charging your water with crystals. I don't really know how that works too much, but there's something there clearly. I think something with water might be the real way to enact some of these changes at that fundamental level. And then these people find that path to get out of these holes that they might be in, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, whatever. And it's just that really easy flow now. It's not some difficult new path of suffering. Ideally, it's hopefully just like, this is like water flowing the best route downhill, and it just happens on its own, and then it starts to snowball. I guess the final takeaway message that I would like to give is just, you don't figure it all out at once, but if the right steps are taken at the beginning, and you start off on a good foot, so you don't have to unlearn all that much later on. I think then it's this very nice cycle, and that just have faith and trust in the process that you'll learn what you need to learn. You'll do what you need to do when it needs to happen, when you're ready for it. And I think a lot of people are increasingly at a point where PEMF is like that next step. They've done this, they've done this, they've done this. Now they are like, ready to work at some of these deeper levels. So it's really good that these products exist. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Some of the conclusions. Yeah, there's some ideas that I think you reminded me of, and that is, let water be thy medicine. Because if you look at the blue zones, I'm sure that's a whole nother show, but the mineral content of those blue zones is really good, high in silica. And I started thinking, well, let water be thy medicine, but you've taken it to a whole nother level with the ideas that, talking about coherence and the levels of information and transfer of water, it's really heavy duty. I mean, those ideas are just, there's a whole nother level of complexity to what you're talking about that's just absolutely mind-blowing. In any case, my website is drbillmcgraw.com for those looking for more information on the kind of work that I do, treating people with RIFE technology, scalar fields, PMF, mats, and there's a coupon on my website where you get 5% anything off at spooky2mall.com, and I think it's 0511 Bill is all the coupon is, and you go to spooky2mall.com website and you get 5% off a PMF mat, like what Stefan has showed you in this video. So there you go.
Yeah, the MiraMate. I'll put all these links in the video description, along with some other useful resources, that some common maybe health things that you may have or just want to educate yourself on. So there's also other jumping off points for you, anyone that's watching this video. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. Dr. Bill, thank you so much for joining today. This is the second podcast. I mean, I've had people tell me I should do a podcast for a long time, way before I started YouTube. They're like, you should do a podcast. And I always found that interesting. And this, I suppose this is number 2, because I recorded number 1 on Saturday. So number 2 episode. Thank you so much for joining and for sharing, your experience, your story, and, being someone that I can talk to about some of these things, and to, help create that kind of summed up view of things, that holistic view, which I think is so important. And yeah, be happy to have you back on at some point if I
I'd lo-
continue to do these.
I'd love to come back, and yeah, you go ahead, go forward and do the podcast thing. I think it's going to be remarkable and a lot of fun.
Cool. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I'll see you all in my future videos. Thanks. Ciao.
Bye-bye.